In 1943, the government begged Americans to plant victory gardens, and 20 million families did. But nobody handed them a bottle of bug spray. There was none. They protected their tomatoes, their cabbages, and their bean rows with nothing but kitchen scraps, barnyard tricks, and knowledge passed down on porches. Number 14 on this list is so toxic that the EPA banned it outright in the 1990s, yet it kept beetles off crops for 100 years. Number 3 was free, sitting on a barbershop floor. And number 1, the oldest trick of all, has been quietly killed off in American backyards, one swing of a hoe at a time. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 forgotten ways Americans kept their gardens alive. Number 25, crushed eggshell barriers. Long before anyone sold a jug of slug pellets, your great-grandmother kept a coffee can by the sink for one purpose. Every morning, the breakfast eggshells went in, and once a week she crushed them with the bottom of a jar until they were a sharp, gritty meal. Then she scattered that ring around the base of every cabbage, lettuce, and hosta in the garden. The science was simple and brutal. A slug is a soft, wet thing dragging itself across the ground, and a band of jagged shell is a field of broken glass to its belly. It would not cross. The eggshells cost nothing. They were going in the trash anyway, and as they broke down, they fed calcium back into the soil so the tomatoes set fruit without rotting at the bottom. 2 jobs, $0. We buy bags of diatomaceous earth for this now and throw the eggshells away. Number 24, the beer saucer trap. This one sounds like a joke a farmhand made up, and it works better than almost anything you can buy. Your grandfather would take a shallow tin lid, a tuna can, or an old saucer, sink it into the dirt until the rim sat level with the soil, and pour in a ½ inch of the cheapest beer in the icebox. Overnight, the smell of fermenting yeast drifted across the bed, and slugs and snails came from everywhere, climbed in, and drowned. In the morning, the saucer was full. The flatter the beer, the better, so the dregs of a bottle gone stale on the counter were perfect, which meant the whole trick was free. A nickel beer protected a whole row of strawberries. Garden writers in the 1930s swore by it, and it is still the single most effective slug control known. But somewhere along the way, we decided a bottle of blue poison felt more like real gardening. Number 23, boards and cabbage leaves laid down as traps. Here is a trick built entirely on patience. Slugs, squash bugs, earwigs, and pillbugs all hate daylight. So when the sun comes up, they hunt for somewhere cool, dark, and damp to hide. Your grandmother gave them exactly what they wanted, and it was a trap. She laid flat boards, old shingles, or wilted cabbage and rhubarb leaves down between the rows in the evening. By mid-morning, every pest in the garden was packed underneath, hiding from the heat. She would walk the rows with a bucket, flip each board, and scrape the whole crawling mess into soapy water. No spray ever touched the food her family ate. It cost nothing but 10 minutes after the breakfast dishes. The boards lasted years. This was a garden defended by attention, not by chemistry. And that attention is the thing we have lost most completely. Number 22, tin can and newspaper collars. Nothing broke a gardener's heart like walking out at dawn to find a row of healthy seedlings cut clean off at the soil line, lying dead on the dirt. That was the cutworm, a fat caterpillar that hides just under the surface and chews through the stem at night like a tiny lumberjack. The fix cost nothing. Your grandmother saved tin cans, cut out both ends to make a ring, and pushed one into the soil. Around each tomato and pepper start, a cardboard toilet tube or a collar of folded newspaper did the same job for free. The cutworm cannot climb over the barrier and cannot tunnel under it in time, so it gives up and the seedling lives. By the time the plant outgrew the collar, the cardboard had rotted into the soil. A row of tomato cans saved an entire summer's harvest, and almost nobody under 60 knows the trick exists. Number 21. Hand picking into the kerosene can. This is the oldest and least glamorous defense there ever was, and for 200 years it was simply called doing your rows. Every morning and every evening, your great-grandmother and her children walked the garden with a tin can holding an inch of kerosene or soapy water in the bottom. They picked Colorado potato beetles off the potatoes, hornworms off the tomatoes, and bean beetles off the undersides of the leaves, and dropped each one into the can to die. Children were paid a penny 100 for potato bugs in some farm towns, which turned a chore into a contest. It was tedious, it was endless, and it was completely free, and it kept the worst infestations from ever getting started because the bugs were removed before they could breed. There was no waiting on a spray to work. You saw the enemy and you ended it with your fingers. First pattern break. Here is what the seed catalogs and the chemical companies do not want you to understand about all of this. The garden was never a hobby. For most of American history, it was the difference between a family eating through the winter and a family going hungry, and a pest outbreak was not an inconvenience. It was a threat to survival. That is why these methods are so relentless and so clever. A woman in 1935 could not drive to a store and buy a solution, and she could not afford to lose a third of her cabbages to worms. So the knowledge got sharp. Every farm wife carried a mental encyclopedia of what each bug feared, what each animal would not cross, and what scrap from the kitchen could be turned into a weapon. The garden was patrolled like a fort because, in a real way, it was one. And when the supermarket replaced the root cellar, that entire library of knowledge walked out of the country with the people who held it. Number 20. Tobacco tea. Here is the one your grandfather used, and you should never touch. He kept a tin of pipe tobacco or a few cigar butts, soaked them overnight in a bucket of warm water until the liquid turned the color of strong coffee, then strained it and sprayed it on his roses and his beans. The nicotine in that brown water was a powerful contact poison, and aphids, beetles, and caterpillars dropped dead within minutes. It was the most effective insecticide most households had access to before the war. But nicotine is one of the most acutely toxic substances a person can handle, absorbed straight through the skin, and what killed the aphid could put a child in the hospital. By the 1990s, the EPA banned nicotine pesticides entirely. Your grandfather used it because it worked and because nobody had told him the danger yet. He sprayed it barehanded in the evening light, never knowing that the same chemistry going onto his roses was a poison the modern world would outlaw. Number 19. Homemade lye soap spray. Before there was a single bottle of insecticidal soap on a shelf, there was the bar of lye soap that every household made from saved fat and wood ash. Your grandmother shaved a few curls of it into a bucket of rainwater, let it dissolve, and sprayed the cloudy water over anything crawling with aphids, mealybugs, or spider mites. The soap broke down the waxy coating on a soft-bodied insect, and the bug simply dried out and died while the plant underneath was untouched. It was gentle enough to use the day before you picked the food and cheap enough to use every week. The trick was strength. Too weak and the aphids laughed, too strong and the leaves burned, so she learned the right cloudiness by eye. Modern insecticidal soap is the exact same idea sold back to us at $10 a bottle. The original cost a sliver off a bar she had already made for free. Number 18. Bordeaux mixture. This blue-green slurry was the most famous garden remedy in America for almost a century, and it was discovered by accident. In the 1880s, a French vineyard owner painted his roadside vines with copper sulfate and lime to make the grapes look poisonous, so passers-by would not steal them, and noticed those vines never got the mildew that wrecked the rest. The recipe crossed the ocean fast. Your great-grandfather mixed copper sulfate crystals, hydrated lime, and water in a barrel, and that vivid blue paste went onto potatoes, tomatoes, and fruit trees to stop the blights and fungal rots that could wipe out a crop in a wet week. You could spot a careful gardener by the faint blue tinge on his leaves and the blue stains on his overalls. It saved untold harvests through the years. The late blight haunted American gardens. We replaced it with synthetic fungicides, but organic growers quietly use copper to this day. Number 17. Pyrethrum powder. Here is a poison that came from a flower, and for decades it was the safest insecticide a family could buy. It was ground from the dried heads of a particular daisy, the painted chrysanthemum, and Americans knew it as Persian powder or insect powder. Your grandmother dusted it on cabbages and squash and puffed it into the cracks of the chicken coop for mites. The compounds in those dried petals paralyze an insect's nervous system on contact, killing beetles and caterpillars within minutes. Yet it breaks down in sunlight within a day and was gentle enough to use right up to harvest. It is the original ancestor of nearly every modern household bug spray. The pyrethrins on the shelf today are simply refined versions of that ground flower. Whole farms in the Mountain West grew the daisies just for the powder. Your great-grandmother fought her bugs with a flower, and the chemical industry spent decades synthesizing what that flower already did. Number 16. Diatomaceous earth and wood ash dusting. 2 free powders, 1 identical trick. Wood ash came straight out of the kitchen stove and the woodpile, and diatomaceous earth was a soft, chalky rock made of the fossilized shells of microscopic sea creatures sold cheap by the sack. Your grandmother kept both in old flour tins with the lids punched full of holes, and she shook them over her plants on a dewy morning so the dust would stick. To us, both powders are harmless and soft. To a soft insect, slug, or crawling beetle, each one is a desert of microscopic razors and a sponge that pulls every drop of moisture out of its body until it shrivels. Ash did double duty, as it raised the soil pH and added potash that made the beets and onions thrive. The only rule was to reapply after rain. It was bug control swept out of the firebox, free for the taking, and most people throw their wood ash away now. Second pattern break? Now here is where the old gardeners were 100 years ahead of the science. They understood without a single laboratory that some plants are not victims in the garden, they are soldiers. Long before anyone could explain it, your great-grandmother knew that you did not plant a vegetable bed as a single helpless crop sitting in the open like a buffet. You wove it through with plants that fought back, marigolds at the corners, onions down the carrot row, a border of strong-smelling herbs around the whole thing, basil tucked beside the tomatoes. The bugs that hunt by smell got confused. The pests that wanted one crop could not find it in the jungle. Scientists now call this companion planting and publish papers proving the exact pairings work. Farm wives called it common sense and were doing it before the Civil War. The chemical aisle taught us to grow our food naked in clean, straight rows and then sell us the rescue. The old way was to never leave the garden defenseless in the first place. Number 15, the marigold border. Every old garden had a ragged ring of marigolds around it, and they were not there to be pretty, though they were. Your grandmother planted them as a wall of defense. The roots of the French marigold release a compound into the soil that kills the microscopic root knot nematodes that swell up tomato roots and choke a plant from below, a fact agricultural scientists later confirmed in trial after trial. Above the ground, the sharp, pungent smell of the foliage masked the scent of the vegetables and threw off the beetles and the rabbits hunting by their noses. A packet of marigold seed cost a dime and reseeded itself year after year, so you bought it once and had a living fence forever. It is the single most recommended marigold companion plant in every old garden guide. And now most people buy a flat of them at the store, set them by the mailbox for decoration, and never know what they were originally for. Number 14, garlic and onion sprays and borders. Here is the home remedy that smelled up the kitchen and saved the roses. Your grandmother peeled a few cloves of garlic or an onion, crushed them, and steeped them in hot water with a little shaved soap. Then strained the reeking liquid into a spray bottle. Sprayed on the leaves, the sulfur compounds repelled aphids, beetles, and even some fungal diseases, and the smell threw off the bugs that locate a plant by its scent. She also simply planted onions and garlic in a border down the carrot row, because the carrot fly hunts by smell and could no longer find the carrots through the onion fog, while the onion maggot was thrown off by the carrots. The two crops protected each other for free. A braid of garlic from the pantry defended the whole flower bed. We pay for organic pest sprays now, whose first ingredient, listed right on the label, is garlic. Number 13, the cayenne and black pepper dust. When the rabbits and the cabbage worms and the squash beetles got bad, your grandmother reached into the spice cupboard. She dusted cayenne pepper, black pepper, or dried hot pepper flakes straight onto the leaves and around the base of the plants, sometimes mixed into a spray, with a little soap so it would cling. Capsaicin, the chemical that makes a pepper hot, evolved in the plant to keep things from eating it. It works just as well borrowed onto a cabbage. A rabbit takes one bite of a pepper-dusted lettuce and remembers the burn. A beetle finds the surface intolerable. It washed off in the rain, so she reapplied. A shaker of cayenne cost pennies, and it sat right there next to the stove. Commercial animal repellents today are mostly capsaicin in a bottle. Your great-grandmother knew the spice rack was also an arsenal. Number 12, the rhubarb leaf and poison plant sprays. This one deserves a warning because it is exactly the kind of cleverness that the modern world decided was too dangerous to keep. Every gardener knew that rhubarb leaves were poisonous, which is why you only ever ate the stalk. So your grandmother boiled those big toxic leaves in water, strained the liquid, and sprayed it on her cabbages and roses, where the oxalic acid in the brew killed aphids and leaf-eating worms. Some families did the same with tomato leaves or tansy or wormwood, brewing the plant's own natural poisons into a homemade pesticide. It worked, and it cost nothing but the leaves you were going to compost anyway. But a brew strong enough to kill an insect is not something you want near a child or a pet, and that is precisely why this kind of folk chemistry faded out as households got more careful. It was resourceful and it was risky, and our great-grandmothers walked that line every single day. Number 11, the trap crop. Here is a strategy so clever it feels like military tactics, because it is. Your grandmother knew the bugs were coming no matter what, so instead of trying to stop them, she gave them a target she did not care about and let them ruin it. She planted a row of nasturtiums at the edge of the garden because aphids love nasturtiums above almost anything, so the aphids swarmed the sacrifice and left the beans alone. She put in a few radishes to draw the flea beetles away from the broccoli and a clump of dill to pull the tomato hornworms off the tomatoes. When the trap crop was thick with pests, she pulled the whole thing and burned it, taking that generation of bugs with it. It cost a packet of cheap seed and a strip of ground. The bugs got their meal, the family got theirs, and the garden was protected by sacrifice instead of poison. Number 10, the working barn cat. Now we turn to the rats, and the first defense never came in a box. Every farm and most town gardens kept a cat or three, and these were not pets, curled on a cushion. They were working animals, lean and half-wild, who earned their place by patrolling the garden, the corn crib, and the cellar for the rats and mice that would otherwise gnaw the root vegetables and tunnel through the seed stores. A good Mauser was worth more than a dog and was traded between neighbors like a prized tool. Your great-grandmother fed hers just enough to keep it close and hungry, never enough to make it lazy, because a fat cat does not hunt. One determined barn cat could clear a property of rats more thoroughly and more permanently than any trap or poison, and it did the job silently, every night, for the price of a saucer of milk. We replaced the working cat with bait stations from the hardware store and lost the best rodent control ever invented. Number 9. Mint, mothballs, and camphor. Rats and mice find the world almost entirely through their noses, so your grandmother fought them with smell. She planted spearmint and peppermint thick around the foundation of the house, the edges of the garden, and the cellar door, because rodents cannot stand the sharp menthol and will not nest where it grows. Inside the root cellar and the seed boxes, she tucked little cloth bundles of dried mint or set out mothballs and chunks of camphor whose harsh chemical reek drove the mice out of the stored potatoes and squash. The mint did double duty, spreading into a free crop for tea and jelly while it guarded the walls. It was a quiet, invisible defense, a wall of scent the rodents refused to cross. Modern rodent repellents on the shelf today are very often nothing more than peppermint oil, bottled and marked up, doing precisely what a clump of mint by the cellar door did for nothing. Number 8. The plaster of Paris and cornmeal bait. Here is the homemade rat killer that every old-timer knew and that you should absolutely never make. When the rats got into the corn crib or the garden shed, your great-grandfather mixed equal parts cornmeal, sugar, and dry plaster of Paris and set the powder out in a lid near the burrows with a separate pan of water. The rats, drawn by the sweet cornmeal, ate the powder and then drank, and the plaster set hard inside them. It was cheap, it used materials already on the farm, and it killed without the family having to buy commercial poison. It was also a slow and cruel death, and the same dish was a deadly hazard to any dog, cat, chicken, or child that found it. This is the kind of grim, effective home trick that the modern world buried for good reason. It belongs in the history, not in your garden shed, and that is exactly why it has been forgotten. Third pattern break. Here is the thing the old gardeners understood that we forgot the moment we declared war on every creature in the yard. They did not actually want an empty, sterile garden. They wanted a balanced one. The smartest among them knew that the hawk circling overhead, the owl in the barn rafters, the black snake in the corn crib, and the toad under the porch step were not enemies. They were the unpaid staff. A single barn owl will take hundreds of rats and mice in a season. A black snake clears a corn crib of rodents better than any poison and never touches a person. Our great-grandparents protected these animals on purpose, built homes for them, and warned the children to leave them be, because they understood that nature, left a little wild, does most of the work for free. Then we paved it, sprayed it, and killed the snake on sight. And now we pay companies to do badly what an owl did beautifully for nothing. Number 7. Owl boxes and hawk poles. Following straight from that, the cleverest farmers did not just tolerate the predators, they recruited them. Your great-grandfather built wooden nest boxes and mounted them on poles and barn gables, specifically to invite barn owls and screech owls to move in, because he knew a family of owls hunting his fields every night was a rodent control machine that needed no feeding and no wages. He set tall, bare poles at the edge of the garden as hunting perches so that hawks and kestrels had a place to sit and watch for voles and gophers in the rows below. It was a deliberate partnership with the wild, an understanding that the way to control the things eating your crops was to make a comfortable home for the things that eat them. Farmers across the country are now rediscovering this exact practice and calling it innovative pest management. Your great-grandfather just called it a good idea and nailed up a box. Number 6. Castor oil for moles and voles. When the moles started heaving up the rows and the voles started eating the roots from below, your grandmother went to the medicine cabinet. She mixed castor oil with a little soap and a lot of water and soaked it into the soil over the tunnels and runways. Moles and voles eat and burrow through soil they push through with their faces, and a ground soaked in castor oil becomes foul and unbearable to them, so they pack up and tunnel somewhere else. It did not kill anything. It simply made the garden a miserable place to live, which is often all you actually need. The castor oil was the same bottle kept for dosing sick children, so nothing extra was bought. Every commercial mole repellent sold today lists castor oil as its active ingredient, the identical trick from the identical bottle, now poured into a fancy applicator and sold at a steep markup. Number 5, blood meal at the row ends. Now the rabbits, who can turn a row of young lettuce into bare stems overnight. Your grandmother's first line of defense was a smell that spoke to something deep and ancient in a rabbit's brain. Blood meal, the dried blood that came as a byproduct of the slaughterhouse and sold cheap as fertilizer, got sprinkled in a ring around the garden and down the ends of the rows. To a rabbit, the scent of blood means a predator has made a kill here, and that is the last place a prey animal wants to graze. So the rabbit stayed out, and as a bonus, the blood meal was packed with nitrogen and fed the soil while it stood guard. The only catch was that it washed away in rain and had to be renewed, and a heavy whiff could draw a curious dog. But a cheap sack of it ringed an entire garden, fed the plants, and frightened the rabbits all at once. Number 4, human hair from the barber shop. This is the free trick that sounds strange until you understand the logic. Once a week, your great-grandmother walked down to the barber shop and asked for the sweepings off the floor, the piles of cut hair the barber was throwing out anyway. She brought home a sack of it and scattered the loose hair around the perimeter of the garden, tucked it into the row furrows, and sometimes hung small mesh bags of it from stakes. To a rabbit or a deer, human hair carries the unmistakable scent of the most dangerous predator they know, and that smell drew an invisible line they did not want to cross. It cost absolutely nothing. The barber was glad to be rid of it, and it lasted until the rains finally washed the scent away. It is one of the oldest deterrents there is, and it is so simple and so free that almost nobody believes it until they try it, which is exactly why it slipped out of memory. Number 3, bars of lye soap shaved along the fence. Here is the deterrent that doubled as a household staple. The strong-smelling homemade lye soap your grandmother already made for the wash had a second life out in the garden. She shaved curls of it along the fence line and the garden border, or hung whole bars in little net pouches from the posts and the lower branches of the fruit trees. The heavy, sharp, tallow and lye smell told a rabbit or a deer that a human was standing guard, and they kept their distance from a garden that smelled like a person was always near. It held up far better in the weather than blood meal or pepper, and a single bar lasted most of a season. This is the direct ancestor of the old trick of hanging scented soap to keep deer off the hostas, a tip that still gets passed around backyards, though almost no one remembers it. Started with the lye soap bar that hung by every farmhouse sink. Number 2, the buried fence. Sometimes the answer was not a smell or a spray, it was knowing your enemy. Plenty of people fenced their gardens against rabbits and watched the rabbits dig straight underneath and feast anyway, because a fence that only stands above the ground is no fence at all to an animal built to tunnel. Your great-grandfather knew the secret. He took the chicken wire and buried the bottom 6 inches to a foot of it below the soil and bent the buried edge outward into an L so that when the rabbit dug down and hit the wire, it could not get past, and digging closer to the fence only put it back against the barrier. Above the ground, the fence only needed to be 2 feet tall because a cottontail will not jump what it cannot dig under. It took more wire and more sweat than a lazy fence, but it was permanent. One careful afternoon of digging protected the garden for a decade, and most people building rabbit fences today still skip the buried part and lose their lettuce, wondering why. Number 1, inviting the defenders. At the top of this list is the trick that is not a trick at all, and it is the one we have erased most thoroughly. The oldest and wisest gardeners did not try to win the war alone. They invited an army to live in the garden and fight it for them every hour of every day, for free. They set a broken clay pot on its side in a cool, damp corner and called it a toad house, because a single toad eats thousands of slugs, beetles, and cutworms in a season and asks for nothing but a shady place to sit. They left the black snake in the corn crib alone because it cleared the rats. They nailed up a birdhouse for the wrens and the bluebirds because a nesting pair of birds carries beakful after beakful of caterpillars to feed their young, stripping the garden of the very worms that would have stripped the cabbages. They planted flowers among the vegetables to draw the ladybugs and the lacewings and the wasps that devour aphids by the hundreds. It cost nothing. It poisoned nothing. It worked while they slept. The whole philosophy was that a living garden full of toads and snakes and birds and bugs defends itself, and the gardener's only job is to welcome the help. We traded that toad and that snake and that owl for a shelf of bottles, and we have been losing the battle alone ever since. Here is my challenge. Try one of these this week. Just one. The beer saucer for the slugs, the buried fence for the rabbits, the toad house in a cool dark corner, the cut hair from the barber shop. Then come back and tell me if I am wrong, or if your grandparents knew something we paid a fortune to forget. Drop the one you are going to try in the comments and tell me which trick your family still remembers, because these were never just garden tips. They were a whole way of living alongside the land, and we have almost let it disappear.